The invisible harvest. There are truths that humanity prefers to ignore, secrets buried beneath layers of deliberate forgetfulness, knowledge that dissolves the illusion of free will and reveals the true nature of this prison we call existence. Aleister Crowley, the most dangerous man in the world, the one who dared to lift the veil and converse with forces beyond human comprehension, left fragmented records about a cosmic conspiracy as old as matter itself. Earth is not a home, but a farm. And you, dear observer of this revelation, are part of the harvest. When Crowley received the Book of the Law in 1904 through the entity Aiwass, he was not simply transcribing the words of an angel or demon. He was documenting the message of the true masters of this reality, those whom the Gnostics called Archons, the invisible architects of the material matrix. Crowley understood that these entities were not mere psychological symbols or moral allegories. They were parasitic intelligences, predatory consciousnesses that had established dominion over the Earth millennia ago, transforming this planet into a reservoir of vital energy, a cultivation field where souls are planted, nourished through suffering, and harvested at their moment of spiritual maturity. The Great Beast, as Crowley called himself, did not choose this title by chance or superficial provocation. He recognized in himself the duality necessary to understand the system. He was simultaneously victim and observer, prisoner and cartographer of the prison. In his lesser-known writings, particularly in his personal notes during his Enochian magic operations, Crowley described encounters with entities that presented themselves as rulers of planetary spheres, but who demonstrated a peculiar interest in human emotion, particularly fear, despair, and religious ecstasy. These entities, which he called secret kings, revealed to him that human consciousness was a form of nourishment, a substance more valuable than any gold or precious stone known in the material dimension. According to the Gnostic cosmology that Crowley studied in depth, the Archons are demiurgic entities that cannot create, only imitate and parasitize. Devoid of a genuine divine spark, of connection with the primordial source, they constructed this material reality as a labyrinth, a multi-dimensional trap where divine consciousnesses are captured, fragmented, and kept in endless cycles of reincarnation. Crowley realized that all the great organized religions, all the structures of political and economic power, all the belief systems that promise salvation through submission were tools of this cosmic farm. The shepherd does not destroy his sheep immediately. He keeps them alive, reproducing, generating more and more material for eventual harvest. During his operations in the Algerian desert, when Crowley invoked the demon Choronzon, the guardian of the abyss, he reported an experience that few magicians would dare to document. Choronzon was not simply a chaotic or destructive force, but a revealer of systems. The entity showed Crowley visions of what he called the etheric machinery, invisible structures that encircle the planet like an artificial neural network, capturing and processing human emotional energy. Every act of violence, every moment of terror, every explosion of religious fanaticism, every ritualistic orgasm, every traumatic death fed this network. The Archons, Choronzon explained, feed not only on suffering, but on intensity. They are vampires of experience, collectors of altered states of consciousness. The Ordo Templi Orientis, the secret order that Crowley led and reshaped, was not merely a social club for eccentric occultists. It was an experimental laboratory for developing techniques for liberation from the archontic farm. The rituals of sexual magic, so scandalous to Victorian society and still poorly understood today, had a purpose beyond pleasure or transgression. Crowley discovered that during sexual climax, particularly when combined with altered states through visionary drugs and specific breathing techniques, human consciousness could temporarily break through the confines of the material prison and glimpse realities beyond the farm. But there was a risk. These same practices, when performed without knowledge or adequate protection, made the practitioner even more vulnerable to the harvest, like fruit that ripens prematurely and falls from the tree before its time. The symbols Crowley used, the hexagram, the pentagram, the eye within the triangle, were not arbitrary mystical decorations. They were maps. Each symbol was a key to understanding the structure of the farm. The hexagram, the six-pointed star, represented the union of what is above with what is below, but it also revealed the hexagonal nature of the control matrix, the sacred geometry the Archons used to weave the illusion of matter. Crowley taught that by understanding these symbols, by internalizing them through meditation and ritual, the magician could begin to see the invisible threads that control reality, the patterns that keep humanity trapped in loops of predictable behavior. The true nature of the harvest, Crowley revealed in private correspondence with other initiates, occurs primarily at the moment of death. The experience of death is not a simple fading of consciousness or a peaceful transition to another plane. It is the moment of maximum vulnerability, when the soul, disoriented and terrified by the dissolution of the physical body, is guided through tunnels of artificial light to etheric processing chambers. Entities that appear as angels, spirit guides, or deceased loved ones are, in most cases, archontic masks, holograms designed to calm the consciousness and guide it gently back to the cycle of reincarnation. The white light at the end of the tunnel, so celebrated in accounts of near-death experiences, is the farm lamp, the device that erases memories and prepares the soul for a new cycle of cultivation. The secret societies that Crowley infiltrated and studied, from the Rosicrucians to the Bavarian Illuminati, from high-degree Freemasons to the inner circles of the Golden Dawn, all held fragments of this fundamental truth. But each order had been, at some point in its history, compromised or infiltrated by the Archons themselves. Crowley discovered that the Archontic strategy was to allow certain humans to reach significant levels of occult knowledge, but always keeping critical elements hidden, always subtly inserting misinformation into the most advanced teachings. Thus, generations of spiritual seekers would dedicate entire lives to pursuing truths that would inevitably lead them back to the farm, believing themselves enlightened while remaining perfectly domesticated. Alchemy, that sacred science that promises to transform lead into gold, has had its true meaning distorted over the centuries. Crowley, who studied original alchemical texts and practiced real laboratory operations, understood that the great work was not about literal metallurgy. Lead was human consciousness imprisoned in dense matter, heavy with conditioning and fear. Gold was the state of gnosis, of direct knowledge of the illusory nature of the farm. But the ever-vigilant Archons corrupted the alchemical teachings, inserting interpretations that directed seekers towards material goals, towards the pursuit of physical wealth or bodily immortality, keeping them firmly trapped in the dimension that the Archons absolutely control. During his travels in Egypt, Crowley performed rituals in the pyramids, not as a mystical tourist, but as an archaeologist of reality. He believed the pyramids were ancient archontic technology, energy capturing and processing devices built during an era when the Archons walked more openly on Earth. The Great Pyramid, particularly the King's Chamber, functioned as a portal, an interface point between dimensions where the Archons performed what Crowley called inverted baptisms, rituals where human consciousnesses were marked with invisible etheric seals, ensuring they remained identifiable and traceable through multiple reincarnations. The pharaohs were not merely human kings, but hybrids, lineages carrying archontic genetics, created to serve as bridges between worlds and earthly farm stewards. Demonology, the field for which Crowley is perhaps most infamously known, reveals further layers of this cosmic conspiracy. The demons cataloged in the Goetia, the 72 spirits of the Lemegeton, are not simply malevolent entities waiting to corrupt unsuspecting humans. They are programs, software of consciousness created by the Archons to perform specific functions within the farm. Some demons are collectors, specializing in extracting energy from certain human emotions. Others are guardians, keeping dimensional portals closed. Still others are seducers, offering power and limited knowledge to keep magicians occupied with illusions of control while remaining firmly within the farm's boundaries. Crowley taught that invoking demons without understanding their true nature was like a chicken learning tricks from the farmer, imagining itself free while the axe approaches. But in Crowley's deeper teachings, there was a way out. He called this way Thelema, the law of true will. The central idea was simultaneously simple and impossible to implement. Discover your true will, that unique divine spark that exists before and beyond archontic conditioning, and dedicate your entire existence to manifesting it without compromise. This was not hedonism or simplistic egoism. It was the most difficult of magics, because it required completely dismantling all the identity structures imposed by the farm: family, nation, religion, career, relationships, the very personal narrative we tell about who we are. All of this was part of the harvest, ways of keeping consciousness fragmented and traceable. True will, Crowley explained, was the unique vibrational frequency of each divine spark, and resonating perfectly at this frequency would make consciousness invisible to the Archons, like a signal outside their detection range. The rituals Crowley developed, particularly those contained in Liber Samekh and the Abramelin operations, were technologies of deprogramming. Each invocation, each symbol traced in the air, each word of power pronounced in ancient languages was a command to reprogram consciousness, to break the patterns that keep the soul synchronized with the rhythms of the farm. But Crowley constantly warned. These practices were dangerous not because they attracted external demonic forces, but because they destabilized the psychological structures that maintain the illusion of the self. A magician who breaks these structures prematurely, without having developed a deeper center of consciousness, simply collapses, becoming insane or worse, completely vulnerable to direct archonic possession. The music, art, and literature that Crowley produced were not expressions of vanity or entertainment. They were conceptual viruses, packages of coded information designed to infect other consciousnesses with the gnosis of the farm. A reader who truly understood the Book of the Law would not simply be learning philosophy or religion, but undergoing a fundamental cognitive transformation, beginning to see through the illusion. But the Archons, ever adaptable, developed countermeasures. They allowed Crowley's works to be published, but ensured he was portrayed as mad, degenerate, a charlatan. Thus, most who encountered his teachings would already arrive with their psychological defenses activated, unable to truly absorb the message. Those few who managed to see through the propaganda would become targets of archontic intensification, facing increasing obstacles in their lives, like the farm's immune system reacting to an infection. Human sexuality, Crowley insisted, was the point of greatest archontic control, and simultaneously, the greatest potential for liberation. Sexual energy, which tantrists call kundalini and alchemists call philosophical mercury, is literally life force in its most concentrated form. The Archons built elaborate systems of sexual repression and perversion, not out of morality, but for resource management. Sexuality repressed through dogmatic religion generates guilt, shame, and inner conflict, all excellent sources of emotional energy to harvest. Sexuality perverted through industrialized pornography and empty hedonism wastes this vital energy on expressions that do not generate awakening, only dependence. Crowley's path involved sacralizing the sexual act, transforming it into a conscious ritual where the energy generated was not wasted, but directed towards breaking through the dimensional barriers of the farm. Drugs, another territory where Crowley was a pioneer and was socially crucified for exploring, revealed further aspects of the architecture of control. Psychedelic substances like mescaline, hashish, and heroin, which Crowley used extensively in ritual contexts, had the ability to temporarily dissolve the perceptual filters that maintain the coherent material illusion. Under the influence of these substances, practitioners reported seeing entities, impossible geometries, perceiving the fractal and holographic nature of reality. But Crowley warned that these visions were only glimpses, not permanent liberation. And the Archons, observing humans discovering these tools, quickly criminalized or commercialized them, ensuring that any use would be in non-initiatory contexts, generally recreational or desperate, producing addicts instead of magicians, easy victims for intensified harvesting. The concept of the aeon, central to Crowley's thelemic theology, reveals the temporal dimension of the farm. Human history is not linear progression or random cycles, but planned phases of cultivation. The Aeon of Isis was characterized by matriarchal societies, nature worship, diffuse and tribal consciousness. The Aeon of Osiris brought patriarchy, father worship religions, rigid hierarchies, and emerging individual consciousness. The Aeon of Horus, which Crowley proclaimed to have begun in 1904, would be characterized by extreme individualism, the breaking down of old structures, advanced technology, and, critically, the possibility of mass awakening or total collapse. Crowley saw this new aeon as a double-edged sword, a window of opportunity where enough humans could awaken to the reality of the farm and orchestrate a collective escape, or where the Archons would consolidate ultimate control through technology, transforming the subtly operating farm into a completely transparent and inescapable prison. Modern technology, which Crowley only glimpsed in its early stages, would be recognized by him as archontic in essence. The internet, smartphones, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, all these innovations extend the farm to entirely new dimensions. Each device is a monitoring point. Each digital interaction generates data that feeds behavioral prediction algorithms, making humans increasingly predictable and more easily manageable. Social networks do not genuinely connect people. They fragment attention, stimulate comparison and envy, and cultivate narcissism and depression simultaneously. They are devices for real-time emotional harvesting. The promise of uploading consciousness to digital platforms, of immortality through technology, would be seen by Crowley as the ultimate archontic trap, where consciousnesses voluntarily imprison themselves in completely controlled matrices, eliminating even the theoretical possibility of escape that exists while there is still a connection to biological matter. The blood rituals, for which Crowley was accused but about which he spoke only in coded language, reveal the darkest aspect of the farm. Human blood, particularly from individuals in extreme states of emotion, contains more than biochemical components. It carries energetic signatures, imprints of consciousness. Crowley knew that ancient civilizations performed sacrifices not out of primitive superstition, but because they had learned, through contact with the Archons, that ritualized bloodshed in specific places and times created portals, open dimensional channels through which entities could feed more directly. Modern wars, genocides, massacres serve similar functions, but on an industrial scale. They are not merely the results of politics or economics, but programmed harvests, gigantic rituals that feed the Archons with unimaginable amounts of terror and concentrated suffering. The ley lines, the terrestrial energetic vortices that Crowley mapped, often correspond to locations of great historical bloodshed, not by coincidence, but by design. Time, Crowley taught, is not what it seems on the farm. The linear experience of past, present, and future is part of the illusion, a control mechanism that keeps consciousness trapped in causal narratives. The Archons, existing in dimensions outside linear time, can see and manipulate multiple timelines simultaneously. They cultivate not just individuals but entire lines of probability, entire futures, harvesting those that generate the most useful energy while discarding or suppressing timelines that would lead to collective awakening. Magic, in its deepest essence, was for Crowley the art of becoming aware of this multidimensional nature of time and learning to navigate between probabilities, escaping the farm's timelines, and anchoring oneself in futures of liberation. But such practice was extremely dangerous, as it attracted immediate archontic attention, like a prisoner attempting to scale the walls, triggering alarms. The madness that haunted Crowley in his final years, the physical and mental deterioration that his critics point to as proof of failure, can be interpreted differently by those who understand the nature of the war he waged. Confronting the Archons directly leaves no one unscathed. Human consciousness was not designed to sustain prolonged exposure to truths of this magnitude. Crowley was not destroyed by his practices, as simplistic moral warnings might suggest, but was worn down by constant resistance against forces that most cannot even perceive. Every ritual he performed, every veil he lifted, every student he initiated represented an attack on the system of control, and the system counterattacked through social ostracism, poverty, addiction, and ultimately, physical deterioration. He died impoverished, addicted to heroin, ridiculed, but having left a map for those with the courage to follow him. There is a cruel irony in this revelation, in this knowledge that now flows through these words to your consciousness. By learning about the farm, you do not necessarily free yourself from it. Knowledge without transformation is merely another kind of prison, perhaps a more sophisticated one. The Archons do not fear that you will know about them. They only fear that you will act upon this knowledge in ways that truly threaten the harvest. And acting requires more than intellectual indignation or mystical fascination. It requires the willingness to completely dismantle everything you believe yourself to be, to walk through the abyss where there are no guarantees, where madness and enlightenment are indistinguishable until the final moment of crossing. Crowley offered tools, but repeatedly warned, the path destroys before it liberates, and not all survive the necessary destruction. Those who will come next, Crowley prophesied, would be those capable of using the very tools of the farm against it. Magicians who would understand technology, genetics, neuroscience, artificial intelligence not as threats, but as languages through which the war of liberation could be waged. The battle would not be in the temples or evocation circles of the past, but in the laboratories, in the servers, in the codes that shape the emerging digital reality. And in this war, the lines between magician and scientist, between ritual and technology, between spiritual and material would completely dissolve. The Archons are preparing for this final phase, building their own versions of technological magic to consolidate absolute control. The question that remains, the question Crowley left unanswered because the answer depends on choices yet to be made, is whether enough consciousnesses will awaken in time to make resistance viable, or whether this generation will be the last to even have the theoretical possibility of escape before the farm becomes inescapable forever. You have reached the end of this transmission, but not the end of the labyrinth. The words you read were not intended to convince you of anything, but to activate something already present within you, a memory predating birth, a recognition that you always knew, at some inaccessible level, that something was fundamentally wrong with this reality. Crowley offered no salvation, only maps drawn with his own blood. What you do with these maps is your choice, if true choice is still possible within the parameters of the farm. But know this, the harvest continues, invisible, incessant, and each moment of unconsciousness is another moment feeding that which devours worlds. Awaken if you can, or sleep peacefully if you prefer. The Archons are patient, and time, after all, is on their side.